Hello, everybody. It's lovely to be back. This is already one of my favorite events of the year. It's the second time. I think it's beautiful. It's got a wonderful feel about it, and nothing could keep me away. Let's hope we have another one next year. Of course we'll have another one next year. Last year I talked about a project called The Good Country. Some of you may have been there. I don't want to talk about the same thing again. I've got a new project that I wanted to talk about today. I'm relying on somebody at the other end to tell me when to stop. Otherwise, we'll be here till dinner time. I'll just keep going. What I wanted to start with was a thought that was provoked in me by the provost. Is a provost somebody who provokes? Is that the derivation of the word? No, of course it's not, but it had that effect on me. The world is also a community that needs to learn how to relate to itself better. And the dangers of the global community not doing that are enormous. It's virtually, as we're beginning to discover, suicidal if the human community doesn't behave like a community. If it's every country for itself, if it's America first, and Britain first, and Ireland first, and Paraguay first, then we'll all come last. There's simply no question about it. And I don't really have a problem with President Trump talking about America first. I don't find that shocking in the least. To me, it seems a statement of the obvious. If you're elected president of your country, of course you put your country first. Duh. But what I find rather disheartening about what I take to be the subtext of President Trump's statement is the idea that everybody else has to come last. And it's sad because America of all countries has been the one that has tried hardest, let's admit it with very patchy success, but it has tried hardest to try and help a larger number of countries all come first. Because in the past it had the wisdom to see that the better everybody does, the better everybody does. Do you remember that beautiful morning about 60 or 70,000 years ago? Cast your minds back when we were living in the Great Rift Valley, although apparently it was a bit further north now, and the first of us decided to start walking away from our single tribe and to move north and to move south and east and west. And we gradually, over the next 60 or 70,000 years, stopped being a single tribe, inhabiting a single zone and facing a single set of challenges. And we became many tribes. And we did what tribes always did, which was to fight and compete and try and screw each other over in as many ways as we could figure out. And here we are, fast forward to 2020 nearly, and what's happened? It's amazing. We are very nearly one tribe again. We are certainly facing a single set of common challenges again. There's no such thing as a domestic challenge. All the problems that Ireland faces are the same problems that Greenland or Kiribati faces. They're all global problems, they're all connected. They're all far too big for any one country to be able to solve them. We have to work together if we're going to solve those problems. That's the simplicity of it. And one of the things that I really did want to share with you this morning is the idea that simplicity is not necessarily a thing to be feared or a thing to be doubted. There's a sort of formula, I think, that we all operate on these days if we're not careful, that says simple plus ambitious equals naive. Now, everything I do is simple plus ambitious, and so I spend my life being accused of naivety. But I persist in believing that unless we can find the right kind of simplicity, we will fail, because the world is very big and very complicated, and so are all the challenges that we're facing today. We need to find a way of simplifying, otherwise we don't know where to start, and we lose ourselves in despondency. And there's a blanket of gloom, we can all feel it today, which is lowering upon us. It just seems to be all too much and all too frightening. I see it in my own children. I see it in the younger generations as well. Over the last 20 or 30 years, I've come to revere simplicity. Not the simplicity that comes only from looking at the surface of things, but the simplicity that comes from looking beneath the surface of things and seeing the simple, fundamental patterns that are going on. So with that said, I can say with some confidence there are really only two things wrong with the world right now. Just two. They're big things, but there are only two of them. The first one is the way that countries behave, and the second one is the way that human beings behave. That's it. It's as simple as that. What's wrong with the way countries behave? Well, I pointed to it a moment ago. The fact that all the countries of the earth are still configured exactly as they were on the day the Treaty of Westphalia was signed, as warring, competing tribes. That's what's wrong with the way that countries behave. The fundamental culture of government around the world is competition. And if we are going to survive and prosper, if our children and our grandchildren are going to have happy, productive lives, we have to change that culture. We have to change the culture of governance worldwide from one that is fundamentally competitive to one that is fundamentally collaborative. There's no question in my mind that that's the requirement today. That's the recipe for fixing the world. Now, that may sound very difficult, and of course it is, but it's not self-sacrifice. My day job is I advise governments, and very often when I go to them and I say we have to change the culture of governance from competitive to collaborative, they think I'm talking charity. They think I'm talking self-sacrifice. They think I'm saying rich countries need to give away their spare money to poor countries. That's not what I mean at all. What I mean is that if we work together, we can also compete, and if we compete and collaborate at the same time, we actually perform better than if we don't. So one of the things I've discovered over the last 20 or 30 years, working with lots of different governments around the world, is that the more you collaborate with other countries, the more ideas you share with other governments, the more you work together with other cities and countries and regions and organizations on your shared problems, the better your solutions become. They become richer, they become more interesting, they become more colorful, they become more inspired. Because stirring up cultures is the very essence of creativity. If you get a bunch of boring, identical people from the same background sitting in a room together wearing the same clothes, trying to come up with solutions to the same problems, they will come up with the same solutions over and over and over again. But if you call in people from very, very different circumstances, people from the other side of the world, people from other countries, and this is normal behavior in the age of globalization, you'll suddenly discover that you get more new ideas than you know how to deal with. You're stirring up the gene pool of ideas. So it really helps governments if they learn to cooperate and collaborate more. It gives them more and better ideas to play with. So this is not self-sacrifice at all. This is just a smarter way to make policy. So I've dealt with the first problem. That only took me about 5 minutes. The way that countries behave, they need to collaborate. They will serve themselves and they will serve the global community better. But there's still a problem. There's a tension between the governments of countries and their populations. The fundamental reason why governments don't want to behave like this, why governments insist on looking inwards and only considering domestic problems, and only campaigning for election on domestic issues, is because they're afraid that the population, the voters, will never forgive them if they start worrying too much about other countries. We talk about populism and nationalism, but politicians as a breed are populist and nationalist. To some degree, that's who they are. They are very domestically focused. One of the curious things I've noticed over the last 20 or 30 years is that the person who speaks the least good English in any government is the man or woman at the top. Isn't that funny? But it's just a statistical fact. You work with a government, and the closer you get to the top, the less multilingual they become. And the person who's actually responsible, theoretically, for driving and making policy is the one who has least conception of the outside world and cares least about it and is the most domestically focused. Of course you must be domestically focused, But you have to be bilingual. You have to be able to think about the world and about other countries as well. Theresa May, was that her name? She was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom a while ago. She said something once at a Conservative Party conference that chilled my blood and the blood of many others. She said, "If you are a citizen of the world, you are a citizen of nowhere." A statement which I think Goebbels would have been proud of. And I replied to her, I sent her a tweet, I don't know whether she read it, but it said, "Dear Theresa, when you become the head of government of a country, you join the team that runs the planet, whether you like it or not." And that's the way it is. If one of you, good luck to you, should be elected next week the president of your own country, even if it's a very small country, even if it's, I don't know, Kiribati, which I mentioned before, you've joined the team that runs the planet. You have an equal responsibility, along with every other head of government and head of state around the country, to make the world work. And every leader has to play a part in that. But they're all afraid that the population will not support them if they do that. And the funny thing is that they're actually wrong. Because I've done quite a lot of research on this, and I've discovered that in almost every country on earth, there is a really substantial minority, and in many cases actually a majority of people who care just as much about the future of humanity and the planet as they do about their own precious country. So the politicians have simply got it wrong. They just think that they're leading a tribe of nationalists, but in most cases they're not. And in any case, what is a nationalist? Somebody who votes for Trump or Brexit or any of the other so-called nationalist leaders today, they're not mad or bad or stupid. They're not different from any of us. It's not the only thing they think. Everybody's a bit of a mixture. We care about our own country, but we also care about the whole of humanity. How could we not? We care about our own village, but we also care about the future of the planet. We're not stupid. And so this division between the idea of being a globalist and a localist is an entirely false distinction. We're all a bit of both. And depending which day of the week it is, or who's been shouting at us last, we may believe that we're more one than the other because we all love to belong to a tribe, don't we? But almost the most dangerous idea on the planet right now is this new idea that's emerged, that the globalists, the people who care about the whole planet, and the localists, the people who care about their own community, should be deadly enemies. And they should be spending their days screaming hatred at each other on social media. I can't emphasize it enough. This is the most dangerous idea on the planet. I don't know where it came from, but we've all accepted it. We've accepted that there has to be this enmity between these alleged tribes. And it simply doesn't hold water. We are the same people in different mixtures. And we shouldn't hate each other. We should work together. Okay, I'm a globalist. Throw fruit at me if you like. But I spend so much time worrying about the upper end of the problem, about the planet and humanity. I never have enough time to worry about the tiny village I actually live in. But there are plenty of people I know, friends and family indeed, who are so busy worrying about the tiny village that we live in that they never give a thought to the whole of humanity or the whole of the planet. That's absolutely fine. I sympathize. And I'm really glad they're there worrying about the local community because I'm not. And I hope that they're really glad that I'm worrying about the planet because they're not. Never could you imagine a situation where cooperation and collaboration is more important. Well, I mentioned that there were two problems, and I've spoken far too much about the problem of nations. Let me speak very briefly about the problem of humanity itself. Every single challenge that we're facing today, whether it's climate change or poverty or inequality or terrorism or pandemics or landmines or human rights abuses, whichever one you look at, they all have one simple thing in common. They were all caused by human beings. The behavior of human beings is in part the consequence of the way those human beings are brought up. And part of the problem with the world today is we're still bringing up our human beings in a way that made sense before this age of advanced globalization, interdependence, and interconnectedness. We're still bringing up our children as if it were 1920, or in fact even 1820. Some days it looks more like 1720. If we want a new generation of human beings who will run towards the global challenges rather than running away from them, as my generation has done, then we need to raise them in a different way. Greta Thunberg is a very good example of how that's already happening. The younger you get, the more understanding there is of the global challenges. The kids today and these wonderful people here, they have the right attitude, but they don't necessarily yet know the solutions. My generation, we know the solutions, but we have the wrong attitude. So somehow or other, we have to get together, we have to work together and fix how we're going to do that. One little project, which I just wanted to briefly mention to you, because in a university context, it's quite relevant. I think that this is very clearly an educational project. Of course, there are around the world thousands and thousands of projects which are trying to bring up the next generation of kids in the right way. But the trouble is, things are too urgent for that kind of piecemeal approach. There are some countries where they teach kids about climate change. There are other cities where they teach kids about tolerance, and they try to inoculate them against racism and so forth. But it'll take 900 years before we build a generation that's really capable of looking after the planet properly if we proceed at that rate. So my simple diagnosis is that what we need today, and we need it very, very soon, is a new global compact on the values or virtues that should be at the heart of every education system on the planet. So I've come up with this modest proposal, which I call the Good Generation, and the idea is that we'll start with a gigantic global online conversation where anybody, anywhere can participate in trying to decide what are those 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 fundamental values or virtues that we all believe in and that we all believe are necessary for the next generation. Once we've set that agenda and we've created those 6 or 8 or 10, then we get all the education ministers in the world to come along and sign a new global compact on educational values and virtues. If anybody doubts that that's possible, take a look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We did that. Look at the UN Charter. We did that. When we need to, we can get together and we can decide on things together. And I'm calling on the world's universities, Trinity included, to help start that process of deciding on those values and implementing them throughout every country on earth through the educational systems, so that, as I said, we get a next generation who run towards the challenges instead of running away from them. Thanks very much.